Welcome back to Beyond Mobility, where we explore the people, research, and advocacy helping shape the future of safe, accessible transportation. Today, we are honored to be joined by Michele, who is the founder of All Wheels Up, a nonprofit that she launched in 2021 after experiencing some firsthand challenges of flying with her son who has a disability. What began as a personal journey quickly became a national movement focused on increasing awareness and advocating for safer, more dignified air travel. So, Michele, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time, and I'm really excited to kind of dive into accessible air travel, especially with how much I fly. So, can you just tell a little bit about what kind of got you into this movement about that flight you kind of took back in 2011?
Yeah, absolutely. First, thank you so much for having me here. I always love talking about accessible air travel and just super honored to be here. So thank you. But yeah, I took a flight with my very young son at the time. He is a wheelchair user, and even though he was very young, he was using a wheelchair. And I learned very quickly how difficult it was to travel with someone who uses a wheelchair. And it was um, a little frustrating, or very frustrating, and actually a little embarrassing to how I was treated. And so I didn't understand. I have a wheelchair accessible minivan at home. He rolls in, we lock him down, we can go on anywhere. And I just didn't understand why air travel wasn't the same way. And so when I got done with that trip and I got home, I just started to see if there were any organizations out there working on accessible air travel, and through the lens of a wheelchair spot on airplanes, and there wasn't. And so I really was just looking for information, and then learned that the tie down systems that I think it was just right then in 2011 or 2012, but they had just passed 20 Gs. And so knowing nothing about aviation, I looked up the airplane seat standards that you and I sit in today, and they are 16 Gs. And I'm no genius, but I thought, wow, there's the math. So I thought all I needed to do was really give the FAA that information. And long story short, I started All Wheels Up to start dynamically testing, which is crash testing wheelchair tie downs and wheelchairs for commercial flight.
Oh, I love that. I love that. You guys have such a clear mission around safety, dignity, and awareness. Um, why is the ability to stay in the personal wheelchair so critical?
I think, that's a multifaceted answer. It's everything from safety to the individual who sits in that chair, that their wheelchair is custom built for them in many cases, and it supports everything from, pressure, not having pressure sores, to even their breathing. But also, so their wheelchair isn't damaged. In some cases, everybody in this audience knows wheelchairs can cost anywhere between $10,000 to $70,000. And so when someone doesn't have that wheelchair, it also puts not just, okay, now we have to fix the wheelchair, but it also puts their health at risk. And so just it's a really broad answer, but at the end of the day, it's all about, the patient risk.
Absolutely. I shared on my personal social media last year that I had gotten a skin infection that led to a wound, and it all stemmed from my broken wheelchair that the planes had damaged. So it is such a huge, huge multifaceted issue. So with your work with the crash testing and the research and the advocacy and everything, how does the research especially help move this conversation forward? And what have you guys kind of learned about how that's gonna play into real world solutions?
I think that is where we differentiated ourselves from other advocacy groups. And so instead of demanding change, we actually met, you know, both this, all the stakeholders and, legislators and Congress in the middle, and funded the research ourselves. And I do believe that if we didn't do that, we wouldn't be here today with, the FAA working on standards for a wheelchair spot on airplanes. And we're modeled very much like a cure-based nonprofit. So, think of any cure-based, they do the proof of concept study, and then they look to big pharma to take on the rest of the R&D. And that's what we have going on now. We've proved that it's possible, and now we see, larger stakeholders, the big OEMs working on the research and development. And so I think that's been the success story here. And, it's been a really successful model, because we're not just saying we want something without some skin in the game. And we do get a lot of pushback, why shouldn't the FAA just pay for this, all on ourselves, all by themselves? And my answer back is, well, the NIH doesn't pay for all research. You have a ton of cure-based nonprofits all funding all sorts of levels of, cures and therapies. And so, it's a new, I guess, era for what aviation research could look like.
I agree. I agree. I love the approach that you guys are taking in terms of doing that research and kind of taking more of an action approach. You've mentioned a lot about the different organizations and different government entities that you guys kind of partner with or collaborate with. How is it important to bring in the manufacturers, engineers, airlines, and those kind of teams to the same table when working on the goal of safer air travel?
It is very important. When we first started back with our very first, what we call our working group or global forums, the first one, we knew what we wanted. We'd already, crash tested the wheelchairs and the tie down systems, and we were way further down the ball field in mindset. And what we learned very quickly was that the industry did not even know, we're talking about the aerospace industry, did not know that wheelchairs and tie down systems had standards, were tested. And so, when you're talking to what I would say a lay person to, in the name of disability, who it doesn't live in this world, doesn't work in this world, and understand, what disability is and everything that comes along with it, what they know as a wheelchair is what they may have seen in a hospital in regards to, pushing someone out to their car or something like that. And so they're like, nope, that's definitely not going to withstand, crash testing. So we realized right out of the gate after our very first global forum that we actually needed to take a step back and really do almost a 101 on wheelchair testing and wheelchair, where the tie downs are already tested at, and really kind of build up the conversation. And so that's where we ended up starting in 2018 at our second one, of kind of just taking the step back and doing just 101 education. And I think that really also opened the mindset of the industry. Now that they knew that we weren't starting from zero and we actually had a launching off point, it really became very clear to the industry that this could be possible.
I love that. And I actually had the pleasure of attending the Global Forum this past year, and it was really, really cool to see all these different people from very different assets of life just coming together for the same mission. And I thought that you kind of facilitating that was very powerful for accessible air travel. And I've never seen anything like that. So I think that you guys are taking such a cool approach on things.
Thank
Um,
you.
you're welcome. So in your perspective, is there any progress that has already been made for accessible air travel since you guys have kind of started your mission? And where do you see some of the biggest opportunities still ahead?
There are definitely improvements, and uh, I know sometimes that isn't necessarily visible to the traveling community, but each airline now has a advisory committee, disability advisory committee. When we started this maybe 15 years ago, there was maybe one or two airlines that had that advisory committee to talk about, that would meet maybe a couple of times a year to talk about what are your pain points with our airline and traveling with a disability. Now we're seeing that literally globally, that these advisory committees are happening, and I think that is a fantastic starting point. But then also just the general awareness from the airlines of what the pain points are. And in some cases, you have very low-hanging fruit where they can make impactful change in a very short amount of time. Everything from just putting their cargo door sizes on their website. I believe American is doing that. I think WestJet has something with another thing about like just being able to track your bag. They've implemented that. So things that are very easily to implement in the process, they are working on how to do that. Of course, with the wheelchair spot on airplanes, that actually I think has made tremendous strides. We are very close to standards actually being created. There are, I think 4 OEMs that now are in R&D on projects for a specific, tie-down system or seating system for a wheelchair spot on airplanes, that once those standards are created, they can go into certification path. And now, we're really just working on what are those next questions. And the next big question is, how do you operationalize this? And so instead of the questions being, is this feasible or is this safe? It is now, how am I going to operationalize this so my traveler can book the ticket online? I think really shows we are very far down the ball field and, creating what in my definition is true accessible air travel.
I would have to agree. Like I said, with attending, I think all of the collaborators you brought in had some really great ideas and innovative approaches for the cargo spaces, the on-plane spaces, the restrooms, even the airport transportation process in general, just navigating the airport. I mean, you guys touched on everything. So I think I would have to agree. I think there's been a lot of good changes, and I'm excited to see what comes. And so, just to kind of wrap things up for families or individuals that are navigating air travel with a wheelchair today, what advice or encouragement would you want them to hear?
That is a terrific question. And the community that needs to actually be part of the solution. And, our comments to the community is make sure you advocate, and so know your rights, what those are. Go to the DOT website. You are a better advocate for yourself once you know what your rights are. But then also, we know it's super easy just to book your ticket online and be on your merry way. But unfortunately, you're going to have to take the extra steps to let the airline as well as the airport know you're coming. I always say this, if you're coming up to my house on a Saturday, I'm not prepared for you and you're going to see a messy house. So if you let the airlines know that you're coming, and even if you're coming with a complicated wheelchair, they're going to be better prepared for you if you give them that notice. So that is definitely something that we've been communicating out. The other information that we're starting to communicate out is, if flying in your wheelchair is important to you one day, to start working with your DME, because you will need a WC19 rated wheelchair. And so knowing that some of your purchases, can take as long as 5 years or more. So, you'd want to make sure that the next wheelchair that you get with your DME is a WC19 rated wheelchair. This is not a new standard. This is a standard that has been in existence for, I believe, 20 years. So this is not going to be anything new. It's just what the FAA is currently looking at as what will be a flyable.
Absolutely. I think those were some great tips. You actually even brought some things to my mind that as a wheelchair user, I probably wouldn't even thought of myself. So Michele, I really want to thank you so much again for taking the time to share your stuff with us, and also for your leadership and your advocacy and your unwavering commitment to make air travel safer and more dignified for passengers with disabilities. I think your work continues to challenge the system, advance research, and inspire meaningful change across transportation as a whole. And thank you to our listeners for joining in on Beyond Mobility. Conversations like this remind us that accessibility not an accommodation. It's a necessity. And we encourage you to learn more about what All Wheels is Up is doing through their research, and stay engaged in the conversation around accessible air travel. So until next time, thank you for listening, and remember, mobility should never limit opportunity.